Welcome to Quiet Scare, where horror doesn't scream, it whispers. There's something remarkable about real documented experiences. These aren't made up. Someone lived this. The thing about authentic accounts is that the core truth often feels more unsettling than any fiction. It's fascinating how a real encounter, carefully selected and thoughtfully adapted, can be elevated into atmospheric storytelling. The team honors the original truth of these real encounters, while using literary craftsmanship to give them the enhancement and atmosphere they deserve. This transformation preserves authenticity, creating sophisticated, sleep-friendly horror that's perfect for nighttime listening. What's interesting is how these raw moments, often brief and disorienting in real life, can be restructured to maintain their impact while guiding the listener to rest. Supporting the channel helps it grow, so liking and subscribing is always appreciated, and the notification bell ensures listeners never miss a new episode. Also, a note on listening: there are typically ads in the first 10 to 15 minutes, followed by uninterrupted listening for a deep sleep session. I saw it at noon, in the kind of light that leaves no room for tricks. The highway ran straight between fields burned to ash, the soil the color of soot, heat shaking the air. My partner Erin was dozing with a ball cap over her face. The AC rattled hard enough to make my right ear go numb. I remember those details because my memory holds when the rest blurs. It's the only reason I'm telling this. We were crossing the rural edge outside Madeira, heading north, 2 hours behind schedule because I lost a fight with a vending machine that kept my quarters. I told Erin the machine would probably miss me when it retired for parts, and I didn't tip it a single dime. She grunted and pulled the cap lower. The fields had been burned through, not in neat rows but in whole squares, like pages torn out of a book. Every fence post wore a black collar. The wind blew a steady sheet of gray down the ditch, carrying the taste of cooled charcoal. I kept my eyes on the road because that's how I handle the world, one thing at a time. From the front bumper outward, the speed limit sign came up bright and clean, then the crossroads, then the shoulder lane widening into packed gravel. That's where I saw the pickup. It sat angled into the ditch, nose low, tail high, a dented white bed with one taillight taped over in red film. A man stood beside it with his arm raised. He wasn't waving. The arm was out and rigid, as if caught mid-gesture. A smaller figure stood in front of him, between the open passenger door and the ditch. The small figure didn't move. I eased off the gas and the world stretched longer. Erin's hat slipped from her face when the Jeep slowed. The man's elbow hung above the smaller person's head, one hard shape against the sun. Gravel crunched under a boot. A sharp, short sound hit the air, sudden, clean. The smaller shape folded sideways and hit the open door. The door shuddered. I asked if Erin saw it. My throat went dry as soon as I spoke. Erin pushed up on her elbows. I angled toward the shoulder. I didn't pull all the way in. I aligned the Jeep so the passenger window had a clear line across the ditch. The ash lifted in low sheets. An irrigation pipe lay broken along the fence, white and harmless. The man turned toward us. I caught his face for a second. Plain and open, the kind you forget unless it shares your table on holidays. His eyes tracked us and slid away, like we were a minor issue. The smaller figure, now I was sure it was a kid, didn't stand right. They braced a hand against the seat and swayed, then straightened. The man's arm dropped. My stomach pulled down hard. I put the Jeep in park and reached for the door handle. Erin touched my wrist. "Call," she said. "Level. I do well with steps." I took my phone and dialed the local number posted on the last mile marker sign. The person who answered sounded bored, in the way people with headsets can manage. I gave the mile marker. I described the pickup, the man, the sound, the way the kid moved. I kept it plain. Plain as how true things sit still. The dispatcher told me to stay in the vehicle. I said fine. We watched. The man raised his hand again, not in a strike now, but steadying. He guided the kid into the truck. I saw the kid's head lean away. The man's other hand rested on the kid's shoulder. My knuckles went white on the steering wheel. The AC rattled. The wind lifted ash. The man shut the door and looked across the ditch at us, then down into the cab. We sat with the engine running. Leaving felt wrong. Staying felt wrong. Erin's hand stayed on my wrist. The dispatcher stayed on the line long enough to confirm we wouldn't walk into it. She said a unit was on the way and told me to have a nice afternoon. It was noon. It was hot. The sun threw hard light. 2 minutes later, the man climbed into the driver's side and shut his door. The truck idled. He didn't leave. Neither did we. When the local cruiser rolled up, lights on, no siren, my spine loosened. I would hand this off. I would say what I saw. I would use the plain words that calmed me down. The officer stepped out and walked to my window first. He leaned in like we were at a neighborhood barbecue and said he'd received a report. He asked what I thought I saw. I told him. I kept the shape of the man's arm and the kid's collapse in the middle of it. I mentioned the sound and how the door moved. I kept my voice steady. He listened and then carefully asked if I'd had anything to drink. I said no. He smiled like we'd shared a joke I'd missed. He said the wind does things out here. He said ash plays tricks. He said heat shimmer can make a door look like it moves when it's still. He said people see what they're afraid to see after long drives. I told him what I saw again. I told him I have a good memory and write things down. He touched the brim of his cap and said he'd go talk to the folks in the truck and we could sit tight. Erin kept her eyes on the pickup. The man sat steady in the driver's seat. The kid's head flickered behind the glass. No one waved. The officer went down the slope and crossed the ditch. He rested his forearms on the open window of the pickup and spoke to the man. The man nodded. The kid stared straight ahead. The officer lifted his chin at the kid and said something I couldn't hear. He turned and waved us down with an easy hand. We got out and went because he called us down, and we wanted to be useful. The ash was slick on the slope. My shoes left prints that filled with gray dust. Up close, the smell of hot engine and burned fields settled around us. The officer said the man had a different account, and we should hear it because strangers get nervous. He said it kindly. The man looked at me and then at Erin. He said he and his nephew had been reorganizing tools in the cab. He said the kid lost balance and bumped the door when the wind hit it. He said the little guy spooks easy. He leaned back so the kid could see me. The kid looked at me with wide eyes and nodded along. His mouth parted and shut. "Tell them," the officer said, gentle. "It was the wind," the kid said, small voice. "Regular." The man smiled at the officer and then at us. The smile didn't reach his eyes. The kid went still again like someone had hit mute. I said that wasn't what I saw. I said it without heat. I hold on to first observations until I have a reason to change them. The officer tapped the door. It didn't move. He tapped again, and it boomed hollow. He said a tap and a slap can line up in hot air. He said he'd write it as a shortstop to check a stalled vehicle. He said we should go enjoy our drive. The man raised his eyebrows to show good nature. He asked if we needed anything else from him. He patted the kid's shoulder lightly, like punctuation. The kid didn't flinch. He didn't lean in. He stayed where he'd been placed, eyes forward, jaw tight. The air went flat around me. It's the same feeling as when a store alarm chirps one bar too long. Small and solid. I cataloged what was in reach. Erin's hand on my wrist. The officer's hand on the truck door. The man's hand on the kid's shoulder. Ash blowing across our shoes. We climbed back up to the shoulder because the officer nodded like the talk was done. He followed and stood close to my open window. He rested his elbow on the sill and said he appreciated my concern. He said it was probably an optical quirk, and people new to field burn get spun around by the heat. He said false alarms are part of the job. I said I wanted to make an official report. He said I had just done that. He didn't write anything down in front of me. He told me to take care, and told Erin to keep me hydrated. He said it like a friend. He didn't move until I put the Jeep in gear. We pulled away first. We had the speed to merge. I kept the pickup in the mirror until the highway crossed a low rise, and the truck tucked into a gap in the ditch grass. The cruiser stayed parked at an angle on the shoulder. The officer had his hands on his hips. He watched us go. At the gas station 10 miles up, I parked under the hatch shade and wrote everything down: time, mile marker, the taped taillight with the top edge peeling, The heat tremble, the kids nod. I breathed through my shirt because the smell of ash had come with us and settled in the fabric. Erin bought 2 waters and a stale pastry. She handed me a bottle and told me to drink. My hands shook. She looked at the page and said we were going to the station in town. The station sat behind the library, a low building with a single flag snapping at half wind. Inside, the AC worked better and made the fluorescent lights hum. A woman at the desk asked, without looking up, what we needed. I said we wanted to file a statement about a possible assault on a minor. I said we'd spoken to an officer at the scene who called it optical confusion. The woman smiled the way people smile at a child gluing a crooked star. She slid a form across and told me to fill it out. I filled the boxes, block letters, careful lines. My handwriting looked steadier than my hands felt. Erin stood next to me and tapped her finger once, twice, then went still. A deputy came out of a frosted door with a coffee cup and the look of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He read my form and asked me to tell him again, out loud. I did. He asked where I was from. I told him. He asked what I did. I said I keep records. He smiled and told me the brain mislabels all the time, especially when people are tired, and he was glad I cared, and he hoped I enjoyed the visit. He said the officer at the scene had reported a stalled vehicle. No offense, nephew present. Witness agitated. He slid my form back like it had corrected itself. I asked if someone could check on the kid. I said they could confirm names and make sure everyone was safe. He told me he knew the man in a general way. He said it like that, and it would be unnecessary to stir up trouble over a misunderstanding. He said this is a small place and people notice strangers who inject themselves into local business. He smiled when he said it. The skin around his eyes stayed still. We stepped outside into the heat. Erin didn't talk until we were in the Jeep with the doors shut. She said we were calling someone else. She named the State Highway Patrol. I dialed. I kept my voice clear. I told them what I had seen and that the local unit dismissed it. I gave the mile marker and the description. The operator listened longer than the local dispatcher. She asked me to repeat the direction of travel. She asked a few hard, short questions that closed boxes. When we hung up, Erin's mouth was a line. We sat in the heat with the AC blowing and the world flattening. Then we moved. We weren't going to put ourselves back in that ditch with that smile. We drove. The fields ran by in quiet squares. An old billboard showed a smiling family and a phone number for a farm tour. The ash lay down as the wind shifted. I checked the mirror more than the road called for. 20 minutes later, the local station's number flashed on my phone. I handed it to Erin because my hands felt small and useless. She put it on speaker. The deputy's voice filled the Jeep. Friendly as a weather report, he said he understood we had made a second call. He hoped we understood it would complicate things for a hard-working neighbor over nothing. He said we could come back to the station and talk. He said if we were mistaken, no harm done. But if we kept saying things that were not true, there could be consequences for filing false reports. He let the sentence sit. The AC cut out for a beat, and then caught again. Erin said we stood by what we saw, and we were leaving town. She ended the call. The phone rang again. We let it ring. It rang again. We turned the sound off. We took the first exit that gave us an angle away from those fields. We didn't talk. We didn't play music. We didn't stop until the burned squares turned to rows of green, and water glinted in ditches again. At a fast food lot, I got out and leaned my forehead on the hot roof. The world felt tight inside the Jeep. Erin stood beside me, close enough to make a wall. That afternoon, I submitted the same report to a larger agency through their website. I typed with the same care I use when I enter data. Someone else will use to make decisions. I attached time, place, the officer's badge number, the taped taillight, the smell of ash. A specialist called me 2 days later and asked pointed questions. I answered from our kitchen table with laundry piled on the chair beside me and a truck passing out front. The kid's face did not go soft in my head. They said they would handle it. They said they couldn't comment further. They said, "Thank you for caring." They said the words people learn to say when words have limits. We didn't drive that highway again. If we had to cross that part of the county, we took the long way that hugs the river and keeps the fields off the right shoulder. Weeks later, when an unknown number pinged my phone, I let it go to voicemail. The message was blank. Just a connection and a decision not to speak. I know what I saw. The tape on the taillight was red, with the top edge peeling. The kid folded and then stood still. The light made everything hard and plain. The officer's smile didn't reach his eyes. The deputy's voice had a soft cover over a firm edge. The people there moved together to keep an outside story out. I left. We kept going until ash shook loose from our clothes and fell into the seat seams. My report lives on someone's server with a timestamp and a case number. Action referred. I don't know what happened next. The air in that ditch was hot and still, and tasted like ash, and in my head it always is. I live in a gated neighborhood in a small town that likes to act big. The gate is steel. The guards have clipboards, and the HOA emails read like court summons. We picked it because the streets were quiet and the lawns matched. Safe, 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 like a word you repeat until it turns to noise. Everyone knows the area is also home to people who run things you don't say out loud. We knew that too. We told ourselves it wouldn't touch us. That night I was folding towels on the sofa, because the dryer eats socks if I look away. My husband Luis was on shift at the hospital. He does overnight sometimes and calls me from the break room to say he finally found the candy drawer in the nurse's station. On my street, the houses sit close, each with a short driveway and a tidy rectangle of grass. Our streetlight hangs outside our window and throws a pale cone across the cul-de-sac. In the cone, you can see the edges on everything: the curb, the mailbox, the neighbor's hedges trimmed too short, and the pale square of the gang member's front porch 4 houses down. I say gang member like a label pulled off a rumor. Everyone knows who his cousins are, his uncles, what kind of trucks they drive, who stands on his porch after dinner. He's younger than the men who act like bosses around here. He moved in with a pretty woman who keeps her blinds straight and her porch clear. I wave at her when she brings a stroller out, and she waves back like she means it. We kept our distance. That was the rule. Stay near, stay quiet, keep moving, and stay in the light. I had one towel left when a car rolled up outside the gate. I didn't see it, I heard it. The security speaker crackled and went dead. That's normal, those speakers die often, and the guard flips the breaker and we get a notice about routine maintenance that reads like a citation. The guardhouse printer jams on Tuesdays, and the guard Pete hates me because I once used my work email on their computer, and now it auto-suggests my name every time he prints. The speaker stayed dead. In the quiet of our street, I counted the hum of our fridge. I checked the window. The guardhouse light still shone across the gate bars. Headlights rolled past, slow and confident. The gate stayed closed, but the car passed through. Some cars have the code and a remote opener. Some people have the guard's nod. It is what it is here. I went back to folding. The first sound I noticed next was staccato and mechanical, and my brain put it in the garage air compressor or a generator hiccuping. Then the sound repeated in a tight pattern that didn't belong to tools. My hands went still. I looked at the streetlight and saw 3 men moving in the pale cone. Too fast and too flat to be neighbors. They moved like people who had measured the steps between the cars in the front porch earlier. They wore dark jackets with nothing shiny. One held his arm bent tight across his chest in a way that answered the question I hadn't asked. They went to the gang member's house. His porch light was off, and the hedges were squared to the concrete. The first man raised his arm and shot through the door panel. The sound made the air in my living room stutter. Drywall dust puffed out. The second man kicked the jamb, and the door swung, then caught on the chain. He fired through the chain, and the chain fell. The third man held the threshold and sighted down the hall with a calm that matched the lamp still on in my living room. I dropped to the floor. The sofa blocked my body from the window. My phone was on the coffee table. I reached up, grabbed it, and typed 911. I didn't press call. I didn't know why. I watched the pale cone of light and kept my breath low. A towel slid onto my wrist and warmed it. The house smelled like fabric softener, clean and false. From the open door, more shots. Short, decisive, close range, not wild, workmanlike. Then a silence that felt like a door shut inside a second door. 2 of the men went into the house, and the third stayed at the threshold. looking back toward the street like he would see me, even though I was below the level of the glass and had turned off the lamp. He checked his watch. I stayed still. I pictured Luis in the windowless break room, reading a snack label. I placed my phone on the carpet so it wouldn't rattle if I shook. They were fast inside. The sounds changed to wood scraping tile, a chair leg, a grunt, a low word at the inconvenience of a layout that didn't match a plan. Then they reappeared, and they didn't carry a body. They carried a rug with weight inside it and the outline of shoulders. The witness in me took over and overruled the person who wanted to crawl. I watched angles. I marked where they stepped. The man at the threshold shifted to give them space, and one muttered something in a tone that was just language without letters. They got the rug down the step, across the walkway, into the front yard. The world narrowed to the square shapes of our yards. They didn't put the rug in a trunk. They didn't carry it down the street. They took it to the strip of public grass between the sidewalk and the curb, the place where the sprinklers switch on at dawn and make shallow puddles that reflect the streetlights. They unrolled the rug there. The face was the man I call the gang member because I don't have a better word. He lay with his chest still. The men did not check him. They didn't need to. One of them pulled a contractor bag from the car, thick plastic meant for drywall, and shook it open. Another took a long rope from a pocket and coiled it on the ground. Their body language said they were finishing something, not reconsidering it. The execution had been done inside. This was disposal, and they were doing it where we all could see. I did not lift my phone again. I watched the second hand on the wall clock. I heard a car on the main street a block over. Steady, indifferent. The men slid the body into the bag with the efficiency of people who have done drywall and also other work you don't write down. One man stepped back, so his shoes wouldn't touch the edge. They tightened the rope around the bag and made 2 knots. One simple, one that held under weight. They did it like they were folding laundry or checking oil. A dog down the street barked twice and then went quiet. No porch lights came on, besides mine. I had turned mine off, but the bulb still held heat. The men lifted the bag into the back of their car. It was a gray sedan with plates I didn't write down. The man who had stayed on the threshold took one last look at the open door, then pulled it closed by the handle. He didn't lock it. He laid the broken chain back against the jamb so it would sit there like it used to. When they left, the silence changed shape. It filled the space they had been in and pushed against the windows. I stood and locked my door twice, then remembered locks are performance. I called 911, then my voice came out normal. I answered in short statements. I gave my address. I said shots fired. I said men carried a body in a bag. The operator asked if I felt safe in the house, and I said yes because the question has only one useful answer. Sirens don't come fast out here unless a badge is bleeding. They came steady. The broken door down the street stood closed but wrong. I could see splinters around the lock in the spill of the streetlight. I waited by my window with the lamp off and my hand flat on the sill. My wedding band pressed a line into the paint. The towels were still on the floor. I picked one up and folded it, then put it down because I didn't want to touch anything besides my house. When the patrol cars turned onto our street, blue light moved slow across lawns. An officer walked with his hand near his belt and knocked on the neighbor's door. No one opened it. He knocked again and shone his light on the jamb where the chain had been. He didn't step inside until the second car pulled up. Procedure takes time, and every extra minute makes you feel like the night is stretching. I stood back from the window. I waited for them to knock on mine. When they did, I opened and said I was the one who called. I didn't step outside. The officer had a polite tone and a pen held like a key. He asked what I heard and what I saw. I used simple statements and stopped when they were done. He didn't ask why I waited to call. If he noticed the pause in the call log, he filed it somewhere else. I told him the men unrolled a rug on the grass and wrapped the body in a bag. He asked where. I pointed to the strip where the sprinkler heads sit at the edge of the curb. The grass looked like it always does. Damp only in the pattern of earlier sprinklers. The street light hummed. The ambulance arrived and sat. The men went into the house in 2s and 3s and came out with the same pace. No wailing, no racing. The night absorbed their noise. A neighbor farther down opened her door and stood in it, then went back in. Two young men from the next cul-de-sac cut across the corner and then cut back when they saw the cars. The gate stayed shut. The speaker crackled and then worked again. A guard stood beside it with his hands on his hips like he was trying to remember a step in a checklist. The woman who lives in that house, his wife I think, or his partner, didn't come home while they were here. Maybe she was gone before. I hadn't seen her car in the driveway. I can only say what I saw. I made tea because my hands needed a task. I didn't drink it. I didn't want the smell of anything new in the house. The towels sat in loose shapes and I folded them without looking down. By morning, the tape was up, but the sun made it look cheap. Our HOA email went out about increased patrols and a special meeting. The subject line used the word incident. The gate company came and ran a test, and cars stacked up and honked. A landscaper edged the same strip of grass where I watched the men unroll the rug. He didn't look down. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he knew and kept moving because that is how you get through a day here. I walked to the mailbox with my eyes on nothing. The streetlight looked lighter in the morning, like a pole waiting for work. The door on that house had a new chain. The splintered trim had been taped with clear plastic. Someone had swept the entry hard enough that dirt lined the crack like a seam. A woman in a gray hoodie walked a stroller past and didn't look toward the house. She kept her eyes on the gate. I didn't speak to her. We don't talk like that at the curb. I didn't invent reasons. I said the words out loud. I don't know why they did it. I don't know what came before. I don't know what comes next. I know that 3 men entered a home 4 houses down from mine, shot a man with plainclothes shots, carried him out, unrolled a rug on public grass, wrapped him in a contractor bag, and took him away. I know I watched it from behind my sofa and then from my window. I know I put my phone down. I know I picked it up later and used my voice like it belonged to someone reasonable. At night now, I keep the towels folded. I keep the lamp off. The streetlight throws its cone, and the edges are still so clean they hurt. The gate opens for people with codes and for people who decide they belong. We all live inside the same perimeter. When Luis goes to work, he texts me when he parks, and I text back one simple line, like I'm folding or I'm in bed. It reads like nothing, but it says I have my head above water. Sometimes I stand by the window and watch the strip of grass. I don't expect to see anything there. The men didn't want us scared. They wanted us informed. They brought the end into the open, placed it where the sprinklers hit, and left everything else for us to rewrap as routine. The routine accepted it. The gate still hums. The guard still has his clipboard, and my mailbox holds coupons I will never use. I can live with all that. I can live with the nights. What I can't file away is how they closed his door before they left, set the chain back where it used to sit, and made the broken look neat. I came to the States to see big skies in small towns. I rented a compact car in Albuquerque and drove north until the highway thinned to 2 lanes. The map showed a pale shortcut through ranch land and cottonwoods, and I took it without thinking about cell service or what a traffic stop looks like when you don't belong to the place. I talk when I'm nervous, so I narrated the scenery into my phone like I was making a travel video for my mother. The ditch water was a chalky green. The air smelled like dust and hot metal from road signs. I told her rural gas stations sell more types of jerky than any person needs, then corrected myself because someone probably needs all of them, just not me. The road kicked me past a feed store and a shuttered diner with a faded Pepsi clock in its window. 3 men stood outside a repair shop, and their heads turned with my car, not hostile, just tracking something new. My curiosity felt useful until it didn't. I rehearsed one sentence in English for a counter. I'm visiting. Where is the restroom? Saying it out loud made me feel prepared and ridiculous at the same time. I had to pee, which made the next choice easy. A small park sat beside the road with a sign that said Arroyo Vista. 2 picnic tables, 1 cracked basketball hoop, a fountain taped off with a note. I parked under a cottonwood and thought about the miles I'd save by not driving back to the main highway. I stretched and checked my messages. My cousin in Denver sent a photo of her kids at the pool. I sent back a thumbs up and a promise to arrive by dinner. I added a note about the tape on the fountain. Even small parks have rules, I said into the empty car, and it made me laugh once. The lights came from behind me first. No siren, just bright bars on the rear view. And then an amplified voice I didn't understand at first. It sounded like a radio in a metal box being played underwater. Then it resolved into words. "Driver, turn off the vehicle. Keep your hands on the wheel." The instruction repeated with the same quiet patience. My hands went where they were supposed to go. I looked left. A second car angled into the grass, tires cutting marks into the dry ground. Doors opened and 2 uniformed officers stepped out with hands up and forward. I saw the black shapes of guns. The cottonwood leaves made small clacking sounds above us. The voice told me to roll my window down with my left hand, then put that hand back on the wheel. I did it exactly as they said. Sweat collected at the base of my neck, even though the air inside the car was cold. My mouth tasted metallic. Maybe it was in my head. The taste was there. "Use your right hand to toss your keys out the window." I held the keys up, said I was tossing them, and let them fall into the brown grass. They made no sound I could hear. The officers came in wide, one on either side, legs bent, eyes steady, guns trained. The one on my left told me to unbuckle with my right hand. He told me to open the door from the outside. He told me to step out and face away. Each step was a hard, separate thing. They walked me backward and made me stop when they said stop. I stared at the bright hood of my rental with its fine coating of dust and a smear where I had wiped it at a gas station. I put my hands on my head, fingers laced, elbows out. One asked if I was alone. I said yes. I said I was a tourist and I had documents. My voice did not sound like my voice. He told me to spread my feet wider. I did. Hands took my wrists and plastic cinched them. The zip tie tightened in a cheap, simple sound. I kept my gaze on the hood. Breath pulled through my throat in a thin stream. The officer on my right said I was being detained under suspicion. He said there was an ongoing situation and a suspect matching my description. They brought my hands down and guided me to the cruiser. "Watch your head," one said. I lowered it because a stranger's hand decided how fast I moved. Inside the car it was cooler. The plastic partition had scrapes, where boots or cuffs had scarred it. The radio spat out locations and short codes. The doors shut and the outside sound turned to a hum. In the side mirror I could see the park sign in my car under the cottonwood. A small dust cloud hung around it. We pulled out. The road looked different from the back of a police car. The lines were the same and my brain counted them. The station sat behind a brick facade on the main street of a town I hadn't planned to learn. A hardware store across from it had a mural of mountains. An older woman pushed a cart past my window and didn't look in. We went through a gate and into a lot. White walls, a humming air conditioner, paperwork, a bench. They cut the plastic from my wrists and put steel on instead. The steel changed my balance. An officer read me words in a steady tone. I knew from borders. I nodded and signed where he pointed. They took my phone. They took my belt and my shoelaces. They left my glasses. They set my bag on a table, opened it and checked the inside seams. I said my name 3 times. Each time the spelling landed flat in the room. A man with a shaved head and a pink mark at the corner of his mouth led me down a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and hot dust. He opened a door and told me to sit on a metal chair in a small room. Cinder block walls, pale paint, a camera in the corner, a small speaker. He shut the door. I sat. Time felt gluey. The skin above my forearms prickled. I watched a red light on the camera and decided it didn't mean anything I could use. That decision made the minutes move. They came back. The shaved head man and a woman with a badge clipped to her shirt at an angle. The woman put a printout on the table and slid it toward me. Copier paper grain. A face that was not my face, and a name that was not my name. The man in the photograph had my hair, and something of my nose, and the tired set of the mouth. He had a scar down from his eye. Text under the photograph used words like aggravated and armed. My stomach tightened cleanly. It told me to be careful with every sentence. The woman watched my eyes. She asked where I had been that morning. I told her the gas station names from my receipts because I had kept them folded in the same pocket. She asked where I was going. I said Denver, my cousin, dinner. She asked who would confirm that. I said my cousin's name and phone number. The man wrote that on a form. I listened to voices in other rooms say names and dates. One voice raised and then lower. The woman asked me to take off my glasses and look straight at her. I did. She nodded and asked me to turn my head. I did. She compared my cheek to the scar on the paper. She asked if I had any scars. I said no. Tattoos? No. A gray pickup? No. The man wrote no in neat boxes. They left me again. I sat. The air conditioner rattled and then smoothed. I thought about my mother checking for my message and not finding it. I thought about the last time a uniform told me where to stand, and how that feeling sat in my chest afterward and did not budge. I made myself think only about the next door opening. The door opened. A man in a plain dress shirt came in with the woman. He set a tablet on the table. He showed me my passport photo. It looked like me if I had been pressed flat. He asked me to confirm my birth date. I did. He touched a screen and showed me a grainy still from a security camera that captured the man from the printout walking into a store with his head down. The timestamp lined up with when I had been an hour away on the road. The man in the still had a cobra tattoo on his wrist. I didn't. The woman checked my wrists. The plain shirt man nodded. They stood. The woman said there had been a serious incident 2 towns over. She said there was a fugitive considered dangerous, and that he resembled me enough for them to approach with caution. She said caution the way a doctor says a word you don't argue with. She said they were working to resolve it and thanked me for my cooperation. Her voice had softened. She said someone would remove the cuffs. The shaved head man came back with a small key. The cuffs opened with 2 clicks. I rubbed my wrists and then stopped because the rubbing made it real in the room. The woman asked if I needed water. I said yes. She brought a paper cup from a cooler and I drank it in 3 quick tilts. The water tasted like the building. The plain shirt man said it was a misunderstanding. He apologized. He said they needed to be sure. They led me back through the hallway, past a door with a humming light and a bench with an elastic loop screwed into the floor. They gave me my belt, shoelaces, and phone. They handed me my keys in a clear bag with a property sticker. The woman offered a printed sheet with a case number. In case you need it, she said. I put it in my pocket. Outside, the afternoon had stretched thin. The sunlight lay flat over brick and blacktop. I walked to my car with my shoulders too square, and then dropped them. The lot smelled faintly of oil and old rain. I unlocked the door. Cottonwood dust from the park sat on the floor mat, and in the crease of the seat where I had slid out fast. My phone filled with messages once it connected. My cousin asked if I was lost. 2 unknown numbers had called. I stood with the door open and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I would be later than planned. There had been a problem with directions and a stop. I said I was fine. I did not translate the shape the day had made in my chest. It would sound like drama. This felt like a thing that had happened, that didn't belong to me but used my body anyway. I drove to a grocery store because I needed fluorescent lights and a normal register song. I walked the aisles and picked up bread, peanut butter, a cold bottle of tea I didn't want. The kid at the register asked if I wanted to round up for a charity, and I said yes. My hands shook when I took the receipt. I made them stop by putting the paper carefully into my wallet. In the parking lot, a man pushed a row of carts past my bumper. He glanced at me and then past me. The world had not changed. For me, it had. I got back on the road. The cottonwoods along the river turned burnished in the low sun. I stayed on the main highway and let the big rigs carry me forward. The radio played a call-in show from a town I didn't know. A man complained about a pothole for 2 exits. The sound helped. My hands held the wheel as a tool I was using carefully. My cousin's house in Denver was bright at the end of the drive. The kids came out with damp hair and chlorine on their skin. She hugged me and asked if I got lost. I said yes. That was true enough. We ate tacos at her table and told small stories that sit well. I waited until the kids went to bed, and the hallway nightlight put a small circle of cold light on the wood. I told her about the park, the lights, the voice. I told her about the picture on the table, the scar that wasn't mine, the wrist without a cobra. I told her about the apology and the release, and how my chest did not get the memo that I was out. She got angry for me in the kitchen. Cabinets held their place. She said we could call someone. She said there would be a way to make someone write it down. I took the case number from my pocket and looked at it. We stood with the paper between us. I slept in her guest room on a bed that sank in the middle. Red digits on the clock changed. Each car outside felt like it was checking on me. I fell asleep near morning and woke up with the feeling of a voice at my ear telling me to spread my feet. It was just memory. I lay there and waited for the sun to push a line of light across the wall. In the morning, I made coffee and packed my bag. I put the case number with my passport and receipts. My cousin kissed my cheek and told me to text when I arrived at my next stop. I said I would. She asked again if I wanted her to call someone and add weight to a scale. I said maybe. I meant yes, but I didn't know how to carry it and travel at the same time. On the way out, I drove past a police cruiser at a light. The officer inside sipped from a cup and watched the crosswalk. He didn't look at me. I watched the light instead of his face. The day was plain and hard-edged. The road went on the way it always did. I took it, because there wasn't anything else to do. I checked into the Timber Creek Motel on a Tuesday afternoon with a backpack full of mics and batteries, and a rental Corolla that smelled like a pine tree had died in it. I was there to follow missing money, not ghosts. The county had a hole in its budget big enough to hide a new truck, and I had spreadsheets, a burner email, and a file of recorded interviews. I also had a reservation under a name I only use when people have already told me I asked too many questions. The woman at the desk slid me a keycard and a photocopied map, where the streets looked like faint veins. She circled the diner and said they closed at 8. Then she glanced at my backpack the way people glance at a baby that might cry on a flight. She said the walls were thin. I said I was a quiet sleeper. She said sure. I parked under a crooked floodlight that buzzed. The motel sat on the edge of a faded strip. Pawn shop shuttered. Hardware store hanging on. Cafe with a porch that needed paint. Behind the strip, low mountains stacked into the distance. I hauled my gear in shifts because I don't skip leg day. I skip everything day when I drive 6 hours on cheap coffee. Inside, I laid out cables in one power strip that looks like a small octopus. I set the recorder on the table, checked batteries, and did the ritual mic test that makes me sound like a person conducting a meeting with air. Then I called the diner to confirm they did take out, because I've learned open can mean the owner's nephew will hand you a biscuit if you can find him. By 5, the wind dropped, and the street outside slowed to a car every few minutes, each engine a separate beat of sound. I walked the main drag and took pictures of a gas station marquee where someone had half-spelled Geo-Team and given up. I texted my editor. In, on plan, eating at a place where the menu font might be older than me. At 6:30, I had meatloaf and a coffee that stripped paint. The waitress didn't ask why I was in town. Nobody did. I paid cash. The register fought her and beeped 3 times, which where I work counts as light bureaucracy. Back at the room, I staged the kit for morning. The plan was simple. Meet a clerk on the cafe porch. Confirm dates, pull paper, build the spine. I set a small old phone on the nightstand and reached for the outlet under the bed, because the room had one free socket, and it was a consensus exercise to use it. It got dark early behind the ridge. The parking lot went from gray to black fast, except the floodlight above my car kept a hard circle of white on the cracked asphalt. I drew the curtain and sat with my notes, and that was when I heard footsteps in the gravel. Not a stroll, heavy steps crossing the lot, stopping under the light, then moving again. I didn't move. The steps passed my door and faded. I checked the peephole and saw nothing. The second time, a truck idled and then eased away. Around midnight, someone knocked 2 quick times, like a delivery. I didn't answer. I hadn't ordered anything. I listened to my own breath and waited until the plumbing upstairs creaked and a toilet flushed. The footsteps didn't come back. I latched the chain, lay down with my shoes on, and slept shallow, ready to move. Morning flattened the mountains into a postcard after all. I showered, left the gear in the room because the cafe was 2 blocks, and stepped into air that smelled like dust and pine tar. The clerk didn't show. She texted 5 minutes after and said she couldn't. Something had come up. That phrase has a shape. I sent a polite reply and didn't put a check mark by her name. On my way back, a man in a denim jacket matched my pace on the sidewalk. He didn't look at me. He spoke into the air. He told me I should go. He said the name of a dead handyman who had talked to a reporter last fall and didn't make it a month. Truck off the river road late at night, no clear reason. He kept his voice low, the way people talk about a storm that missed them by a mile. He said not to use his name. He didn't wait for me to agree. He crossed the street and kept walking. I watched him until a pickup rolled to stop and cut the line of sight. I went back to the motel and set the chain. I changed the plan. I pulled a lav mic with a frayed cable out of my case and taped it under the inside seam of my jacket. I ran it to the old phone in my inner pocket with the voice memo app open. After lunch, I was scheduled to meet a uniform at the county office. PR, they'd said, to make sure I had the right contacts. I don't usually take anything to those I can't afford to lose, but I didn't need the best kit. I needed to hear. The county building had handprints on the glass door, and a bulletin board with youth soccer sign-ups and 3 burn permit notices. The receptionist smiled without showing teeth, and slid me a ledger. The pen was chained to the counter. I wrote the name I was using. She made a call, nodded, and pointed to a bench. He came out in uniform with the posture of someone who has carried a heavy belt long enough that the weight became part of him. He introduced himself, shook my hand, and said he could give me 5. He stood by the glass with the sun behind him and said he had heard I was in town. He said they liked truth there. He said they didn't appreciate rumors. He smiled like we were at a neighborhood cookout. Then he leaned close enough that I smelled mint and something metallic, and he told me straight that he wouldn't be able to help me if I had a problem out on those roads, given response times. He said if my equipment got lost, it would be tough to file a report from out of state. He made it sound like a weather advisory. He used my real last name. The recorder in my pocket listened. I kept my face steady and asked for the public records officer's email. He handed me a card like he'd had it ready. I walked out. My legs felt hot and empty. I didn't look back through the glass. Outside, the same truck from the night before idled at the curb with the driver inside. He adjusted his mirror toward the sidewalk. I crossed to the other side and rounded the hardware store. I listened for footsteps behind me and heard only a bird in the eave. I reached the motel in the bright heat of midday and slid the keycard. Red again. Green. The room smelled wrong, sweet and sharp, like a baked cord. The TV sat skewed on the dresser. The drawer I had left closed stood open a finger width. The bedspread had a crease down one side like a knee had pressed there and lifted. I stopped at the threshold. My laptop lay on the table where I'd left it. A fine crack traced one corner I did not recognize, and when I pressed the power button, it chirped and died. The battery pack lay on the carpet with a fresh dent. The digital recorder sat in the open with its power light dark. I picked it up. It rattled. I checked the bathroom. A wet handprint at waist height marked the shower curtain. The bin was empty. My cable bag sat open. My clothes in it were turned. I stayed in the doorway and looked at everything without entering. I held my breath to listen. The air conditioner clicked and stayed off. I went to the desk. The woman there raised her eyebrows like she'd been waiting. She said housekeeping hadn't been in. She said someone had reported a man in the lot earlier, but he was a guest. She looked at the sign-in ledger and then at me and asked if everything was okay with my room. She asked gently, as if she already knew the answer. I told her my room had been entered. I didn't add detail. She looked at her screen like it might give her a rule. She offered me a new key card. She didn't offer a new room. I took the card and didn't go back inside. In the shade by the stairwell, I opened the voice memo app on the old phone. The timer had run. I scrubbed back 45 minutes and heard my shoes on county linoleum, then whined as I left, then the hollow sound of my motel door opening, then quiet. After a long gap, hard plastic hit wood, a small crack, a breath I didn't recognize, a short low chuckle that wasn't laughter, a man's voice, close to where the hidden mic sat in my jacket on the chair back. He wasn't talking to me. He said, She's not going to like this. Footsteps. The recording stopped. The timestamp put it just after noon. The recorder had kept running. I hadn't meant to leave it on in the room. It didn't matter what I had meant. I gathered what still worked. The field recorder was finished. The laptop was probably finished. The old phone with the audio was not. I slid it into my waistband. I packed the bag and zipped it. I stepped into the sun and put the bag in the trunk. The truck across the lot started. I didn't look at it. I got in the Corolla and set my hands on the wheel. The leather felt tacky. I checked the rear view and saw my eyes and the slice of the lot behind me. I reversed, turned, and rolled onto the street. Then the highway. Then the 2-lane that led down out of the mountain shadow. There's a reflex that tells you to push when you're pushed. It has a time and a place. The time wasn't that parking lot. The place wasn't that town. I drove to the next city with a chain motel by the interstate and lights that didn't buzz. I paid with a different card. I locked the door and wedged the chair under the knob. I set the phone on the bed and backed up the audio to the cloud. Then I sent a copy to my editor and another to a friend in another state who never deletes anything. I didn't sleep. I lay down, closed my eyes, and saw the hairline crack on my laptop screen. Morning. I drove home with the phone in my pocket and the audio in 3 places. Somewhere in Nevada, I played it again. It had what it needed. The voice at the county office making a promise he wouldn't call a threat. The breath. The chuckle. The break. The words in the room that weren't meant for me. I cut the episode a week later on a borrowed machine with the care I use when handling glass. I didn't name the motel or the worker in the denim jacket. I named the county and the year. I said the dates from the ledger, the line items, the purchase orders for equipment that never arrived. I layered the office audio and the silence from my room and the small clean crack that told the truth. I called the state auditor and read their boilerplate flat. I read the clerk's cancellation text myself. I kept my voice steady. When it aired on a bigger city syndicate, I didn't sleep. Not because I thought a door would open, but because I could hear my voice through the wall from my neighbor's radio, and it thinned the room. The inbox filled. Some angry, some grateful, a few scared. One from a lawyer with a signature block that needed its own page. He asked for raw files. We moved that to another channel. I didn't go back to Timber Creek. I didn't go near it. The man in denim didn't write me. The woman at the desk didn't either. The sheriff's office posted about vandalism and told travelers to lock their cars. They said nothing about my room. They said nothing about the man on the tape. I sleep with shoes near the door now. I keep copies of copies where I can't reach them in one step. I back up slower because I check as I go. I don't chase credit in places that like to check names. I name what matters and leave the rest obvious. People ask why I drove away and didn't wait for someone to fix it. They say I should have pushed harder. They say file in the next county. I tell them the truth. I was there to collect facts and keep breath in my lungs long enough to use them. I wasn't there to be brave alone under a buzzing circle of light while a truck idled and a piece of my gear broke, where I couldn't see who held it. The tape was my reply. It still is. The audio runs clean. A voice warns with a smile. A room answers with a crack. Then air, footsteps leaving, and a door that doesn't close on the recording because it was open when it shouldn't have been. That's what I can tell. The rest is the mountain, the road, and the way people look away when you mention the river after dark. I keep a list in my head. Names, dates, places where the ground dips and the grass grows a little too dark. I don't write it down. Paper gets lost in a town like ours. People do too. If you trace south of Kansas City and stop before the hills turn into nothing, you'll find places like ours. Small squares of light from kitchen windows, a 2-lane road and a feed store. We're not famous. We wave with 2 fingers off the steering wheel. In the 1980s, we didn't say cartel, and we didn't say corruption. We said that's how things are, and we said it quiet. My work wasn't special. I stocked shelves at the hardware store on Main. I had a memory that stuck. People would say little things, and I would keep them. I learned to hear more in the squeak of a shopping cart than on the front page of a city paper. That's not a talent you brag about. It's a job you don't apply for. It applies for you. Here's what was true. The illegal business in town ran smooth up top and dirty underneath. It wasn't kids behind the ball field. It was regular, organized, and safe for the people who ran it. Those men wore badges. If you're seeing movie monsters, don't. These were the same officers who handed out stickers at the fall fair. They checked locks after a break-in. They ran the DAR table and told kids to keep their heads straight. Their uniforms were pressed. They knew everyone's names and who had a sick parent. Their control over the narcotics trade was steady, like a dial set by hand. Nothing ran hot unless they wanted heat. The first time someone disappeared, people said car trouble or a weekend down at the lake. We left porch lights on and baked casseroles. At the grocery, I pretended to compare 2 brands of coffee and kept my mouth shut. That's our version of respect. We look down so we don't have to see. I kept a routine. I set 3 alarm clocks, because the one near the bed drifted 10 minutes every month. I wrote a return slip for a warped rake handle that wasn't our brand. I avoided jokes at the counter because I have a bad habit there. I did make one aside to myself when I stood in line at the DMV for 2 hours. I learned my shoes squeak when I'm nervous, and nothing else of value. Then I went home and put the paper in a drawer I labeled boring but necessary. The second disappearance landed harder because I'd talked with him. He worked nights at the grain elevator. He kept his paycheck folded into quarters. He told me quiet that he was done moving packages for a friend of a friend. He didn't say cops. He didn't have to. He went missing on a Thursday. His mother pinned a flyer to the post office board. She wrote his middle name in careful cursive. By the 3rd, there wasn't a question anymore. People who resisted the control vanished. We weren't brave. We kept our heads down and talked about rain we didn't get. The sheriff's office stood with their arms folded and nodded slow, the way you nod at a funeral when you want a person to stop crying. We read the message. You don't need words for that. I called a number I wasn't supposed to call. It wasn't an emergency line. It was a federal tip line from a late-night PSA. I kept it under a magnet on my fridge. The magnet was a smiling cow from a dairy barn tour. I stretched the phone cord across my shoulder and gave the man on the line dates, places, and the names from my list. He asked for my name. I gave it. My heartbeat was loud enough to feel in my teeth. I did tell him I could have used a shorter hold time, which wasn't helpful for anyone. He didn't laugh. That was fine. I hung up and washed my hands because the receiver felt greasy. Then I waited. After that, I didn't joke. I watched. Federal people don't sweep in. They seep in. They asked for paperwork at the county office and sat in the diner and stirred too much sugar into coffee. They wore jackets when it was warm. Their cars were clean. You could pick them out by the way they watched the hinge when they entered a room. I saw one studying bolt sizes like he could squeeze the truth out of a hex head. He left without buying anything. That made sense. Then one of the disappeared turned up. A man walking his dog along the old service road found him down the ditch where tires sink. The dog led him and then stood still. I didn't have a sixth sense. I had a list. We all drove out and stood behind the tape. The air smelled like mud and gasoline. He was one of the men who said no. That turned rumor into a wall you could put your hand on. The deputies showed up with lights and tape and low voices. They moved like they had a plan. They made notes. They touched elbows. The deputy nearest us told us to go home. We went. Because that is what we do when a man with a badge tells us to clear out in a firm tone. My porch light came on at dusk and threw a weak triangle on the steps. I sat at the kitchen table with my keys in my pocket. Inside, the small sounds became a list of reasons not to sleep. The refrigerator cycled. A baseboard ticked as it cooled. I wedged a chair under the doorknob. It was pointless, but it made my hands stop shaking. I slept on the couch because the bedroom window faces the road. At one point, I wrote a name on a receipt with a pencil, tore it up and put a piece on my tongue. The graphite grit made me gag. I spit it into the sink. I didn't know why I'd done that. I turned on the cold water and let it run. 2 more were found within weeks. The places felt chosen. Field edges, a ravine where kids sled, a culvert that should have been cleaned. The disappeared were dead. We said murdered in low voices, and then shut up. We went from denial to silence without a middle step. The town's heartbeat slowed. That's how it felt when the phone stopped ringing after dark, and every car you didn't recognize made you stand away from the window. By then, the federal cars didn't bother to blend. They set up in the old bank building with the broken clock at 11. They carried in file boxes and a coffee machine that produced brown water. They asked for station records across from the feed store. They asked for shift logs, patrol routes, asset seizure reports. They were boring on purpose. Boring means real. Boring means someone is counting and will not stop because you want them to. The break came on paper. The men who ran the trade had done it a long time, and long jobs leave receipts, seizures that didn't reach the proper accounts, storage units paid in cash on the dot, calls that started on lunch break and ended at 3 numbers near the county line. Their hands were on every valve, but the meters didn't lie. Counting did them in. Counting is not a story. It's a number that doesn't care how you feel. They took my statement in a room with a light that hummed. A ring from someone else's cup stuck to the tabletop. I spoke in short sentences. I said who came by, what they bought, what they asked, and how often. I described one officer who asked about register cameras, told a bad joke, and stood too close. The agent across from me didn't write everything. He didn't need to. The pattern had been the same every time. Officers controlled the trade. People who resisted went away. When enough went away and came back as bodies, the outside stepped in and cut it open. The arrests didn't feel like a cheer. They felt like a noise stopping. The chief stood in cuffs. 2 deputies stood with him. A night dispatcher took off her headset and laid it on her desk like she could still hear the channel. They walked out under lights bright enough to make the paint on the door look old. We watched from across the street. No one spoke. Someone coughed into a sleeve. A news van idled a block down and never moved closer. The feed store owner put his hands in his pockets and stared at his boots. The funerals were plain. Ministers said the right words. We bent over rectangular holes and didn't cry where people could see. The federal people stayed back near the trees. The local officers who weren't arrested moved like they were in a room with something fragile on every surface. People dropped off food in aluminum trays and left before the door opened. That was the pace of it. Chores, not speeches. After the raids and the interviews, the air thinned. The phone stopped ringing past midnight. On Main, nobody idled at the corner you used to avoid. The traffic changed shape. I'm not going to guess what happened down the highway. I can only say it didn't run through here like before. That's the part I can swear to. It got quiet in a way that didn't feel like fear. It felt like absence. The federal people didn't stay to build anything. That's not their work. They cut out the rod and left a hole the size of trust. The county posted job listings for new officers like any other job. We lined up forms and resumes and waited in a room that smelled like dust and coffee. You can't hire history. You have to live it long enough that it sticks. That part takes years. I still stock shelves. I still keep the list in my head. It isn't longer now. It's sharper. When a kid needs a box cutter for his first shift at the warehouse, I make him sign the log and remind him to keep the blade retracted in the aisles. When a woman buys an extra hasp for her shed, I show her the better screws because the cheap ones strip and don't hold. That's what I can do. It isn't noble. It's the next available action that makes something safer by 1 notch. Some nights the wind runs down the empty block and rattles the paper in the windows of the old bank. The clock never moved past 11. People tell me we should replace it so we don't have to see a stuck time every day. They want the hands to move. I understand. A stuck clock says one thing until you agree it happened. A moving clock says it's over. We had a long stretch when men with badges kept the dead quiet, and the living quieter, and the only way through was to bring in people who didn't know our names. That memory doesn't run on gears, it runs on whoever keeps it. Last month I drove past the old service road. The ditch had new grass. A fast food bag was wedged halfway down the slope. I looked away and then I looked back. Memory is a habit you feed by accident. It can help you and it can make you sick. I keep it because someone has to. When people tell the story in a way that cleans it up, I say it slower. I say the parts that matter and nothing extra. People who resisted disappeared. They were found dead. The illegal trade was controlled by law enforcement. The outside came in, dug it out with paper and arrests, and the flow stopped here. That is the shape of it. That is this town. That is why I still keep a list, and why I don't write it down, and why the grass by the ditch looks darker even when the sun is high. If you grow up on a story, it settles in your bones. You move like it's true because it's the floor under your feet. Mine was simple. My mother protected us from a dangerous man, the old veteran in the trailer by the lake. It explained the locked doors at dusk, the rule about avoiding the West Shore, and the tight feeling in my jaw when I saw his pickup near the grocery store. I wore that story like a jacket, even in summer. We lived outside Ludington, Michigan, where the woods lean down to Hamlin Lake and the trailers along the water ride out every season. Mom kept our place neat. Morning sat in a square of light on the kitchen floor, and her coffee smelled like a plan. She passed the story down from her father and to my older cousins. The man by the lake had done something back when my grandfather worked at the mill. Something you didn't put in print. I never heard a fact. Safety was the point. I wasn't supposed to walk the west loop past the campground. I did anyway and counted the trees between me and the shore, like distance could protect me. I ran errands early to avoid him at North Country IGA. I picked the line without the cashier who loved long chats, because I wanted clean exits more than coupons. The summer after I turned 17, the story didn't feel like protection. It felt like an order. I had a truck that ran hot and a head full of what I thought was loyalty. At the township office, I waited a full minute while the clerk finished a word search before selling me a day-lot tag. I stood there thinking a stopwatch would improve local government by at least 20%. Mom was on the phone with her sister every night that week. Doors shut, voice flat and hard. I caught edges of phrases when she crossed the hall with a stack of mail. My grandfather's name, the word cover, and a long push of breath. When I asked if everything was okay, she said we needed to be careful this summer because of him. She looked south when she said it. The old story didn't let me rest. I was 17 with a simple equation in my head. He did a thing, we lived safer if we enforced the rules, and the rules had teeth. The more I held it, the more it sounded like permission. I told myself I wanted to send a signal, not to hurt him, to scare him, to let him know he wasn't welcome where families camped and kids learned to swim. It sounded righteous when I said it in my head. I had just enough teenage hubris to confuse heat with light. Everyone knew where he lived. A rutted drive off a private turn, a flag on a short pole, a porch slanting toward the water, a metal shed out back, a neat stack of firewood cut to even lengths, his name in faded letters on the mailbox. I never saw a second car. I planned it like a chore. I wrote a list in my phone, then deleted it because it read like evidence. I bought a red gas can at the Ace on Ludington Ave, and told the cashier I needed it for my mower. She nodded without interest. Life kept moving. I waited for a clear night. Campgrounds on the far side were full. Wood smoke carried across the lake in a low band. I parked near the day lot just before closing, and walked the shoreline under a weak moon. The water showed a dull sheen. I knew the path to his place from careful drives past it with Mom. I stayed in the trees and kept my feet quiet. At the edge of his property, the dock cut off the little beach. A lantern hung by the door. A fold-out chair sat on the porch with a faded cushion. The yard was quiet. Water lapped. Pines gave their soft noise. Bugs did their work. Far off, a laugh from a campsite and a radio clicked. No dog. No second voice. I stood by the shed and poured a little gas into a plastic cup I'd brought. The plan was to run a thin stripe along the far side of the trailer where the shadows stayed, enough to scorch the siding and throw heat, enough to make a point. No person hurt, no flames near the door. A message. The can's metal handle tapped my thigh. If I ever did this again, I'd wrap a towel around it. That thought landed and soured in the same breath. Halfway along the skirting, right hand slick with fuel, wood creaked. The porch door eased open. The sound wasn't sharp. It was patient. The lantern shifted. A new shadow blocked the rectangle of the doorway. The light didn't hit me full on. It came low and off to the side and showed boots and then knees. "Don't run," he said. His voice was old and steady. You'll fall on that and set your pants on fire. I held still. I could have dropped the can and sprinted. I could have thrown the cup and made a mess. Everything I had rehearsed fell apart, and all I had was a small sound that didn't help. He took the steps one at a time and stood on the ground. The lantern stayed behind him, so his face stayed in the edge of darkness. I saw the brim of a cap and the line of his jaw. "You want to tell me why you're here?" he asked. "I'm lost," I said, thin, useless. He looked at the gas can and the damp stripe along the skirting. "Come closer to the light," he said. "Set that down first." I set it down. My hands clicked the handle. He didn't reach for a phone. He didn't reach for anything. He watched me like I might still make a better choice. "I know your mother," he said. "I know your grandfather." The names hit like a door latch. I didn't expect him to claim them. I didn't expect him to put himself in our house. He told me not to touch the can. He took the lantern down and angled it toward the ground. He kept the distance between us the same. "There's a story in town that isn't true," he said. He spoke in plain lines, no fancy words. "There was a night a long time ago. The cops went to the wrong house because a man at the mill, your grandfather, got there first with a lie. He pointed at me and it stuck. Your mother carried it. It protected her from another truth. I wanted him to be lying. That would have been easy. I wanted to feel the clean anger I brought with me. It sagged and went flat. Your father ever tell you this?" he asked. "He's not around," I said. "Your mother?" he asked. His voice eased a notch at her name. "She said you were dangerous." He nodded once. Not hurt, not dramatic, just a practiced motion, like marking a box. "Take the can and walk back to the lot," he said. "I'm not calling anyone tonight. If you come back, I will. Go home and ask your mother a question she won't want to answer. That's the only clean way to end this." The lantern sputtered and held. The night stayed steady. I picked up the can and left. No excuse, no demand for proof. Proof felt like a word you use when you already know. The path back followed the same trees. The lake kept its soft sound. Across the water, the radio clicked on and back off. I put the can in the truck bed and sat with the window down until the bugs found me. Then I drove home. I waited for morning. Mom always woke first. The kitchen light made a low rectangle on the floor. I walked in with the gas can like I was holding a sign I didn't want to read. She looked at my hands, my face, the can. She set a spoon back in the drawer. No bounce in her eyes, no shock, just recognition. "You went there," she said. "I did," I said. "He caught me." She didn't ask if I was hurt. She asked the practical thing. "Did you do it?" "No," I said. "He told me you know him." She sat at the table. She didn't tell me to sit. I stood. The room had Sunday quiet. She stared at a knot in the wood and then spoke. "Our father," she said, meaning her father and my grandfather, did a bad thing. He hurt a woman who trusted him, and he told a different story that night. He told it first and loud. He pointed at someone else, and it stuck there. It was wrong. I stayed still. Pressure built against my chest. I had lived like I was on a team standing against a threat. I had spent last night trying to deliver punishment for something a different man had done. "You told me he was dangerous," I said. "I told you what I was told," she said. The word "told" came out tight. Then I kept telling it because it was easier than saying who my father was. "I wanted to protect you from the noise and the respect we would lose." "You knew," I said. The pressure turned hot. "I knew by the time you were little," she said. I locked the doors and blamed him. I didn't know how to undo what my father did. I didn't want to stand in this town and say I came from that. No tears. Not from her, not from me. We sat there and watched something in our house come loose. She asked what he said on the porch. I told her he didn't call the police. I told her he told me to come home and ask. I told her he said he would call if I came back. "I'm going to talk to him," she said. "I don't think you should," I said. "Leave him alone." She flinched. "Small, but there. He doesn't have anyone," she said. "You gave him this," I said. "You want to fix it now?" She stood and slid the spoon deeper into the drawer. "I thought I could carry it," she said, "and you could live clean." I drove to the lake before dinner and sat on a public bench where the wind came straight across. A father helped his kid cast without snagging the line. When I got home, I put the gas can in the back of the garage. Then I took it out, drove back to Ace, and returned it. I had the receipt. The kid at the counter slid the paper back and said, "Have a nice day." His tone said he wanted to move to the next customer. I appreciated that. That night, I packed a bag. No slammed drawers. I took clothes and the cash I saved for new tires. I wrote a short note. I said I wasn't going to live inside a lie built to protect a man who didn't deserve it. I said I was leaving for a while, and not to call me unless she wanted to tell the truth to more people than just me. I slept in my truck by the county line. It wasn't brave, it was quiet. The next afternoon, I found a month-to-month place with a kitchenette on Loomis Street. If I leaned out the window and squinted past bar signs, I could see a sliver of lake. The floor creaked, the sink drained slow. It was mine. I didn't go back to the West Shore. I didn't walk his road. I didn't knock on his door to tidy the story. I hadn't earned a scene where I learned wisdom and got forgiven. Leaving him alone was the one part of the mess I could control. Mom tried to keep the old shape for a while. She called and left messages with the words we had always used. When I picked up once and asked her to say my grandfather's name and what he did, she said it flat. It didn't fix anything. It made the air clear for a minute and then left it empty. We didn't have a final fight or a porch talk that stitched anything back together. I didn't bring kids to her house for holidays. We didn't make a plan to try again. We stepped into separate lives and stayed there. Some afternoons I ran along Lakeshore Drive and used the cheap rhythm of footfalls to slow my head. I swapped my lock screen to a picture of the water from Stearns Park, where you can't see the West Shore unless you want to. I went once to my grandfather's grave with no speech ready. A groundskeeper pushed a mower in slow lines near the fence. I stood until the fuel smell made my eyes smart and left without talking. This is what stayed fixed. I planned to burn a man's home because I believed a story built to hide something worse. He caught me before I did it, and chose not to ruin my life with the chance I handed him. He told me to ask a question that would break my house. I asked it. The house broke. I kept walking. The lake looked different from town, and I let it stay that way. I knew what was happening in that house before the sirens ever came. In our town, you can hear a single door slam and know which door it was. We don't have tall buildings or noise to hide inside. We have 4 stoplights, a diner with a grill that never cools, and a police lot that glows blue at odd hours. I run flyers and calendars for the community center. I post notices for food drives, softball, and bake sales. People hand me information because they want someone to carry it without dropping it. Twice a week I pass the house on Birch Avenue. It looks harmless from the street. New siding, trimmed hedges, a car that must cost more than my yearly budget. The man who owns it runs the biggest employer in town. His name is on the scholarship plaque in the high school lobby. I kept the list of winners. I kept another list too. I wasn't planning to be the one who knew. I meant to drop off flyers, grab a coffee, and get back before the copy machine could eat another toner cartridge. The copy machine has a special diet and it craves the expensive stuff. That day I locked myself out of the office, and the assistant's voicemail sounded newer and brighter than the hallway ever looks. I went back outside to wait, and heard the door on Birch slam. It wasn't loud, just a clean final sound. Then I heard the second one. The house has 2 doors, a front with a glass panel, and a side door into the kitchen. You can tell them apart. I knew the sounds of tires on gravel, and the way he parks with the nose of the car over the sidewalk, like his driveway needs more space. You pick up these things when you walk everywhere. He showed up 2 years ago with polished shoes and a plan to turn our mill into a performance center. He shook hands in church basements and civic halls, and made the town a bullet point on a slide. People said he was good. People said he could have picked a better place and chose us anyway. He brought jobs. That mattered. Something else mattered at the same time. I didn't know her well. She worked mornings at the pharmacy and closed on Thursdays. She wore her hair pulled back and kept her shoulders tucked. like her space was smaller than everyone else's. She never came into the community center, but I saw her across the parking lot. She checked over her shoulder even in daylight. The week after early June, a light yellow mark showed on the side of her neck. You could see it if you looked straight at her, which most people did not. If you asked how I knew, this is what I would give you. The same porch light went on late at night with no visitor. A window that never had blinds suddenly had them, and they were always closed. A delivery guy told me the man took a package and called him by his first name, though they had never met. The guy asked how he knew. I told him he must have read the badge. The guy said the badge was flipped around. I kept a list in the back of my appointment book: day, time, sound, motion, outcome. Sometimes I wrote front door, 10:20 p.m., silence after. Sometimes I had more: side door, 12:34 a.m., crash like a shelf, then a man's voice too low to words. Her car leaves 6:10 a.m., returns 6:35 a.m. with bag of ice. He backs out 7:02 a.m., no backup beeps. I wrote without flourishes. I wrote because stories drift without anchors. The arrest came in the afternoon, when our town looked softest. Heat lifted off the asphalt. The trees behind the school turned their undersides. The blue lights were there and then gone, like they didn't want to be seen doing what they were doing. 2 officers I know walked him down the steps. They moved clean. His jaw was set. He looked at no one. He wears the same face to everything. The report would say a neighbor called. It wouldn't say the neighbor had tried before. I stood under the maple, outside the library across the street. I didn't raise my phone. I watched. You could hear the difference between the cruiser door and the house door. The cruiser door had weight and a seal. The house door was paint on wood. They took him in and counted it. Someone wrote it on the whiteboard in the glassed-in room at the station. Arrest, assault. They don't use that marker on guesses. The town moved around the event with care. People said alleged when they forgot who they were speaking to. People adjusted their voices in the bakery like the air carried liability. I got an email asking for a copy of the community board's harassment policy. It was polite and well formatted. The company logo sat in the signature block. The email arrived the same hour he posted bail. He was out that night. His car was back in its spot on Birch, nose over the sidewalk. The lamppost made a circle on the street where you could see your own shoes if you looked down. No one cut his power. No one posted a notice. The next morning he jogged. The shirt was bright for drivers to see. He waved at Mrs. Crowley's porch. She waved back because we don't have a separate wave for men who hit and men who don't. The police report became a thin stack at the clerk's counter. You can request it and get it stamped. It costs a few dollars. It states what it can. It has blank spaces where the word should go for why he was home by supper. I kept my list in the back of my book. I slid it between old handbills for fall cleanup and a PTA note. I am not an investigator. I am not brave. I am a person who hears doors. He had influence before he had the house. We all knew it. You feel it in your bones when a pathway opens where a wall should be. He sits on boards. He fundraises. He knows first names before you give them. He knows which nephew wants a summer internship and where a donation makes people stand up and clap. He knows who meets for coffee at the diner and takes the corner table where you can see the parking lot. The night after the arrest, the side door slammed. I marked it. The next day, a lady from Human Resources at his company handed out a 1-page statement in our lobby because we host their blood drive. She asked if I would post it on the bulletin board. It said they take these matters seriously. It said they do not tolerate violence. It said nothing about what happens when the person who commits the violence signs the checks. She gave me a small closed smile. It looked like the face you make when a cold spoon touches your wrist. The victim. She is a person with a name and a job. Went to stay with her sister 2 towns over. I learned that from a friend of a friend. The friend asked me not to put it on the board, or in the newsletter. I didn't. I took her shifts on 2 mornings so the pharmacy wouldn't be short. I stocked shelves and set out paper bags. A customer asked for a neck wrap you warm in a microwave. They sit up high because no one buys them until the weather turns. I got one down and scanned it. The register stuck and gave me a small shock. I stepped back and waited for the drawer to catch and close. I thought about the press, but our paper is 2 reporters and an intern. They ran what they could. The story sat next to a photo of a kid selling lemonade to raise money for the dog park. The kid held a cardboard sign with marker letters. The story said arrested. It said assault. It said released. It did not say we all knew. People talk around things when the person who did the thing can buy a table at the gala. They remember scholarships and say personal matters as if those weigh the same. Someone told me he gave a speech at Rotary about resilience. Someone else told me a tech from the alarm company visited his place the morning after the arrest because the cameras needed upgrades. I knew what that meant. It meant a better angle on anyone who comes to the door. There wasn't a supernatural piece to this. No footsteps without shoes. No whispers through vents. Just a door that closed over and over. Sometimes the front. Sometimes the side. When the wood swelled in summer, it dragged across the jam. I wrote that down. It is a sound you recognize when you are the person who hears the pieces shift. The police came again after that, but not for him. They came because a neighbor's car alarm wouldn't stop. There was a question about a battery. The officer on duty asked if I had a wrench at the center he could borrow for a minute. I handed it over and watched a row of ants travel across the sidewalk. The officer thanked me and brought the wrench back. He nodded toward Birch. I didn't ask. He didn't tell. He wasn't punished. That is the sentence the town won't say out loud. 2 weeks later, he hosted an event for the Kids League. People clapped when he handed over a check. A photo went up on the town Facebook page with a caption about community spirit. The comments were hearts and thumbs up. I scrolled them at the folding table by the gym, while I signed out clipboards. The laminate on the table edge peeled and caught my thumb. A small edge can pull at your skin all day and keep you aware of your own hand on the page. Keeping a list won't make you crazy. It makes you run a small, stubborn kind of math day. Time, sound, it puts order where someone else keeps taking it. It makes me think of the front door, and the side door, and the way they tell you different things based on which one closes. One says someone came home. The other says the kitchen is empty and the house is settled for the night. I gave the list to someone. I won't write who. I handed it over in a plain envelope and stuck to the facts. I didn't say we all knew. I said the door closed at this time on this day. The person nodded and wrote in a notebook. You do what you can with a town like this. You write what is true. You carry it steady. You do not call it anything else. When I pass his house now, I take the other side of the street. I look ahead. I note the cars, the windows, the lights. The hedges still look trimmed. The side door still catches when the air turns damp. The sound is the same as it was the week of the arrest, the week of the release, the week of the Kids League check. I note it because no one else writes it down, and because it is true, and because the truth should live somewhere even if it never dents a man with money, and friends, and a calendar full of events. He used who he was to step around the part where people answer for what they do. The law came and took him for a while, and put him back where he started. The house on Birch holds its shape. The doors still close. I still hear them when the street is quiet. I still mark the times in my head when I leave my book at home. I will keep doing it. I am not a cop. I am not a judge. I am a person who heard the first slam and knew exactly which door it was. I came to Maple Hollow for a quiet peace. Afternoon sun, empty sidewalks, a statue of a soldier in the center of the square, pointing at nothing in particular. I had a week at the single motel on Main, 3 blocks from the library. The plan was simple. Talk to folks about the old sawmill fire, shoot some B-roll, find the scene where a local legend became a fact. I fill my days with those scenes. They usually fray without a fight. Check-in took 20 minutes because the desk printer decided my name had too many letters and screamed about it like a smoke detector. The clerk apologized and handed me a paper key sleeve with the room number in pencil. I made the usual joke about not losing it. The sleeve had the motel's name misspelled, which felt right. The library sat behind the square, a low brick building with no trees to shade it. The librarian, Claire, met me at the desk with a watchful smile. She liked the word policy. She liked it so much she said it twice while I filled out a visitor slip. When she unlocked the file room for me, She kept her keys in her hand like she never put them down. I shot the monument from 3 angles. The pigeons ignored me. A kid on a bike circled the fountain and counted under his breath. My tripod leg stuck on a crack in the sidewalk, and I made a note to buy tape because I can fix almost anything with tape, except apparently a life. The first real lead came quiet. Claire said the word microfilm but meant film. Actual film, stacked flat in a gray archival box. I lifted the reels with both hands. They showed a parade, a mill shift change, a meeting in the rec center. At the end of the third reel, I froze on a frame with the same men in every shot, always on the edge, never smiling. They occupied corners like furniture. They were in a smoky room with a hand-lettered sign that read committee and nothing else. Someone had let the reel run long enough to catch a hand covering the lens. I went back to the motel and cataloged my equipment hummed on the little table against the window. Room air smelled like a warm mop. A bulletin board in the lobby held a flyer about an all-town picnic with no date. The manager had written soon in marker and underlined it 4 times. I answered emails. I ate pretzels and told myself this one would be straightforward, because even I enjoy a lie when it has a schedule. Day 2 bled into day 3. Afternoons in the square, evenings in the file room, nights in my room editing with a towel under the door to block the hall light. The town felt like a stage that never changes the set. I gathered meeting transcripts from a cardboard banker's box marked minutes. Half the pages were duplicates. Half of those had the same coffee ring. In a stack labeled Civic, I found typed notes from what looked like a fix-it subcommittee. The subjects were not potholes. Names appeared and disappeared. Phrases repeated. We handled it. No further action. The same initials signed off each time. Around sunset on the 3rd day, I got the first push. I came back to the motel to find my room door open 4 inches, enough to feel like a mouth. The chain was still latched from the inside. I didn't know how. The desk clerk shrugged and said a housekeeper must have left it that way. The bedspread was smooth. My case sat where I left it. My laptop took longer to wake and showed a password prompt it did not ask for before. I pressed my thumb to the sensor. The cursor blinked like a metronome set for patience. That night, something shifted in me from curiosity into a line drawn under a number. I moved my footage to 2 drives and put one in the frame pocket above the bathroom mirror, behind a hotel hairdryer instruction card. I recorded a short piece to camera about what I'd found so far. Just the facts, no flair. I kept my voice steady. At the library the next afternoon, Claire brought me a box without a label. Inside, under a felt sheet, sat a stack of 16mm film and a folder marked Rec Center. The folder contained typed notes of a closed session called to discuss non-compliant actions. The date matched the frame where the hand covered the lens. I asked if I could copy a few pages. Claire looked at the clock and said she would help. She fed them into the scanner, sheet by sheet. The copier jammed on a staple and flashed a red light, and she muttered about maintenance. Her tone softened when she got it running. She said she admired persistence. I said I admired cooperative public records laws. She didn't laugh. I paid in cash and left with the copies under my jacket because I didn't like how the street felt. The statue pointed. The pigeons shifted to the other side of the base. The first voice came that evening, and I would not call it a threat yet because it did not need to say much. I stepped out from the motel office with a complimentary cup of coffee, and a man stood near the ice machine with his hands in his coat pockets. He had a sheriff's badge on his belt. He looked at my cup like it was a code violation and said the town liked its privacy. He asked what exactly I was filming. I told him public history, interviews, a cutaway of the square. He said to be careful with context because context made people look wrong. He said people were tired. He said the square was for everyone. He never asked my name and never gave his. When I walked back to my room, the chain swung once against the doorframe like it had been tapped. I shot at the monument until late. A car idled at the curb and then idled on the next block when I changed angle. I logged plates into my phone out of habit and saw the same string twice on different trucks. My camera battery died early, which was unusual. I swapped it for a fresh one and made a note to test the charger. That night, my door did not latch on the first try, or the second. The third, I raised my shoulder and set it. The lock caught. The hinge creaked after I stopped moving. At 2 in the morning, a shadow crossed my blackout curtains. I did not know if it belonged to a person or a car. The AC kicked off. I heard a soft scrape outside the window like a card against stucco. I stayed still. The sound moved left, then down. It stopped at the door, and did not try the handle, which made it worse. The sound left. A minute later, the hall light went out. I lay awake until dawn, and watched a slice of gray scan across the ceiling. I found a smear on the door jamb at breakfast. It looked like grease. It smelled like oil. On day 5, I met the person who mattered. It started like a bad pickup line. A folded note under my camera case on the library table. 3 words, "Stop by 4." The back had the address of a house 2 streets from the square. The porch had a swing and the paint peeled in long uniform strips. The woman who answered the door wore a cardigan and an expression that did not want company. She looked at the camera bag on my shoulder and told me her name was June, and that she used to know my aunt. She did not. She wanted me to come inside where it was cooler. I stood on the porch boards and said I preferred to talk out here. June told me I was asking the wrong people the right questions. She said there was an old group that ran everything, and still did. She named the rec center and the Mills Community Fund and the bank as places where handshakes lasted longer than policies. She said she knew because she grew up in it, and they had a way of stopping what made them uncomfortable. She said if I wanted to leave with anything that counted, I needed to hide it twice and leave early. Then she handed me a flash drive. She said not to ask where it came from and not to tell anyone I had it. She said not even the librarian. She called me by my last name without me offering it. When I looked at her again, I saw it. She had my grandfather's nose. She closed the door before I could say anything else. The porch swing creaked once with no one on it. I walked back to the motel and did not use the front door. I went past the ice machine and took the back stairs. My key turned as if the lock didn't care. I set the flash drive by my laptop and stared at it like it might heat up. I plugged it in with my left hand. It held a single folder marked 1978 to 1984. The voice I recognized appeared in the margins in blue pen, initials circling paragraphs. I copied everything to both drives, and to the cloudy place where files go when you stop trusting rooms. The next hit did not come as a knock. I went to the square for a pickup shot, the statue from the bench line. When I came back, my door was open to the wall. The bedding lay on the floor. My drawers were out and stacked like steps. My gear cases were on the bed, open and empty. My memory cards were not in their slots. My laptop was closed but warm. The sign said, "Do not disturb." The room smelled like old smoke and lemon. There were scuffs on the carpet where a tripod head dragged. I held my camera by the lens because I didn't know where to point it. The motel manager leaned into the hallway with his hands up, already apologizing. He said a pipe burst and set off a chain of housekeeping checks. The carpet was dry. He offered me a different room that felt like the same room with a bed pushed to the other wall. I carried my 2 hard drives in my jacket pockets. I touched the bathroom mirror, and the card above the hairdryer crinkled a little but did not fall. The drive behind it was still there. I slid it out and into my sock. I called Claire to say I would return materials early. Her phone went to voicemail. The message said the library would be closed for inventory for the rest of the week. I do not scare easy. Fear drains from me slow. This one came fast and stayed. I packed the little I could. I had 1 drive in my pocket, 1 in my sock, and 1 flash drive under the palm rest of my laptop, taped flat in the space where a spare battery would go. I zipped my bag and stepped into the hall. The 3 men waited near the ice machine where the sheriff had stood. They did not carry weapons you could photograph and show a jury. They wore jackets that hid everything. Their hands were empty. One of them stepped closer, and his eyes never touched my face. He nodded like we had agreed to something. He did not say a word. He lifted his chin toward the door, and then toward the parking lot. He wanted me to understand that he did not need to say it. He had distance and time, and the liquor store camera that didn't work. He had keys I would never see. I moved around them and walked out. The air hit my face cold even in late summer. The square stood quiet. The statue watched me leave. I made it to my car. The tires were fine. The engine started on the first turn. The low washer fluid light came on. and I laughed once because laughter sometimes slips when it should not. I drove to the library even though the sign said closed. The glass doors were dark and blank. I saw my reflection in the square behind it, and the men across the street who pretended to look at a storefront. I did not see Claire. I went south on County 7 because the GPS said it was faster, and because the hills felt like cover. The rear view showed the same mailbox 3 times, and then it showed nothing, and then it showed the sheriff's car half a mile back. He did not flash lights. He did not tail close. He just existed where I could not ignore him. I took the next right and the next. I told myself there were other cars. There were not. 10 miles out, a truck pulled across the road from a farm lane and blocked both lanes, while a man in a hat adjusted a strap over the bed. I stopped with space, and we looked at each other in the mirrors. He took a long time to finish. He waved an apology without turning his head. The sheriff's car arrived in my rear view and stayed. The man in the hat moved his truck as if he had finally remembered how driving worked. I passed and did not look left or right. Night found me before the state line. It found me on a 2-lane with no lights, and a stand of trees that pressed close to the shoulder. I drove the limit because I did not want a reason to be invited to step out of the car. Every mile marker felt like a small mercy. When I finally saw a gas station, I pulled in and parked under the brightest bulb. I locked the doors and sat still. I breathed through my nose and let the shake leave my hands. I plugged in the flash drive again. I watched the folder open and the files appear. I checked the copy on the external drive. The files were there. I ejected clean. I turned off the screen. I did not go home. I went to a city big enough to have a newsroom on the 3rd floor of an office block and a coffee shop that served at midnight. I found a room that did not have a square or a monument or a clerk who apologized like a script. I wrote it up. I called a lawyer to ask what was safe to say. I filed a request to seal one witness's name. I slept in pieces. A week later, an email came from an address I did not know. It contained a single sentence: "You should leave this alone." There was no signature. The sheriff from Maple Hollow gave a quote to the county paper about a blogger who misunderstood history. He did not say my name. I still have the flash drive. I still have the copies. I still have a short, shaky recording from a motel room where the lamp buzzes, and a fridge hums, and my voice says that the real show men in a room where minutes omitted the real minutes. Somewhere between the square and the farm lane and the gas station, they took most of it. They broke my cards and dumped my cases and walked through my room with a list I could not see. They left me something I could carry without help. Something small enough to hide. I can still smell that oil smear on the door jamb when I think about Maple Hollow. It was on my fingers when I got on the highway. It stayed until I washed my hands in a bathroom 2 counties away and watched it swirl down a sink that had seen worse. If you stand in the right place in the square on a clear afternoon, the statue lines up with the library door. It points you there. That's geometry I can prove on tape. Most of the footage is gone. Enough of it made it out. We moved because the town was supposed to be quiet. Not fake quiet, but porches and bakery quiet, with a strip of pine woods behind the rental. The listing photos had that late summer haze, and I told myself that meant slower mornings and my kid sleeping through the night. We hauled boxes through the front door, and he went straight to the backyard, where the ground dipped toward the trees. He came back with a small thing in his palm, stone or metal, thumb worn with a shallow crease in the middle, and held it up like a shiny coin he planned to spend later. We met the neighbor when I was wrestling the mattress up the stairs. He stood on his porch with his arms folded and said to watch the line by the trees because kids pick up what doesn't belong to them. He pointed with 2 fingers like there was a fence you could trip over even if you couldn't see it. I thanked him and went back inside. The mattress won. That was my first lesson in the town's hospitality. That night my son fell asleep on the couch with his sneakers on. I carried him to his room and set the small object on the kitchen counter. The house had that new old smell. Fresh paint over old wood, compressor in the fridge that groaned and settled every so often. Sometime near midnight I woke up because the hallway felt wrong. I stepped out and saw my son standing by his door, eyes open looking at the corner where the hallway meets the ceiling. He spoke in a low, careful voice I didn't recognize, and said there was a road where the stores were asleep, and the light didn't change. Then he blinked and asked for water like nothing had happened. I put the object in a drawer. In the morning, it was back on the counter. I told myself I'd moved it without thinking. He ate cereal and asked if the town had a gas station with a tall canopy. We had just moved. He had never seen the town beyond the grocery and the school. Across the next few nights, the pattern set in. He would wake at the same thin hour and stand with his palm flat against glass, the back door, the bathroom mirror, once the front window, and stare at a spot just beyond whatever surface he touched. The house changed in small ways when he did it. The floorboards didn't squeak randomly anymore. They creaked in a slow, regular rhythm. The vents didn't just blow air, they pulsed like a long exhale you could time. A faint gasoline smell came and went for no reason. I booked a pediatric appointment and kept it. Then I changed bedtime and cut screens. I hid the object in the freezer. I put it in my glove box. He walked into the kitchen the next night with it in his fist. The neighbor left a jar of salt on our porch with a note that said not to let him cross to the empty block after midnight, and that the warm side of town is the side with people on it. The note didn't explain what empty block meant. I folded it into my wallet, then took it out, then put it back because I didn't want to forget the phrasing. I didn't like the idea of the man watching our windows, but I also didn't like the way our house seemed to tide in and out after dark. On the fourth night, I stood at the back door and saw us in the glass. My son's hand pressed against it, my face next to his, and a third shape, long and pressed close on the other side. Too tall for the frame, edges bent like heat above asphalt. The yard itself was empty. The porch light was on. Nothing blocked it, but in the reflection, something stood behind us, and when I lifted my son, he turned heavy in my arms like he'd braced himself against something I couldn't see. I set him down and stepped backward. The small object in my pocket gave off a soft, insecty hum. I took it out and put it on the counter. The hum stopped. My son gasped once, eyes wide, and then he was just a kid who wanted a blanket. The neighbor knocked without being invited and stood in my kitchen like he belonged there. He said in a steady tone that this town sat across an old run, and that children felt the seams first. He told me not to drive the old road past the glass fronts. He said the thing that lived on the far side of town stacked itself in the windows and liked to be seen. He asked for the small object. I told him no. He smiled too long and said if I ran, I should run clean and not look in the windows. During the day, we were fine. We went to school registration and bought adhesive hooks. My son laughed when the neighbor's cat darted out from under the porch. He drew the same block over and over. Empty storefronts, papered windows, a lopsided traffic signal, a gas station canopy with tubes of cold light. He added a fixed red hand on a crosswalk sign and scribbled the road thick with pencil until the paper pilled. I kept the object in the house because taking it felt wrong and throwing it out felt worse. By the fifth night, the house had a pressure I couldn't ignore. Door latches feathered open by themselves. The stove clicked even though the knobs pointed to off. There was a faint sound of tires on wet pavement that seemed to come through the walls. My son stood at the front door and answered pauses in the silence, as if someone on the other side spoke in slow, quiet lines. That was the point where the doubt snapped. I picked him up, grabbed my keys, locked the door, and walked to the car. The neighbor's porch light flicked once and went dark while I was buckling the seatbelt. As I reversed, shadow collapsed across the driveway as if someone tall had stepped into it. I didn't check. I put the car in drive and went. The plan was simple. Highway on-ramp, motel, fluorescent lobby, coffee, daylight. The town did not let me keep that plan. The fog was thick in the side streets. The navigation spun and reoriented without ever finishing. Every sign that said highway pointed me toward a road with closed stores and a row of glass that reflected my headlights more than the painted lines did. We reached the block from his drawings before I recognized it. The storefronts had dust inside the panes and taped signs left over from a summer sale. The traffic light over the intersection went through colors with no traffic to guide. The first window showed us. The second showed us again, closer. In the third reflection, something else stood with us, slivered, tall, right over my son's side. I kept moving, but each new pane remade the view. My engine stuttered every time I passed a large, clean sheet of glass. The same roundabout appeared twice, then a narrow alley opened and closed when I turned toward it. I didn't know how the streets connected. I didn't know why the car felt heavy 2 blocks at a time. My son didn't talk. He sat with the object in his hand and lifted his arm once, slow, pointing toward a storefront with a fake plant in one window. His voice came out layered, not the way people say possessed, just like he was catching a second track, and he said, in that other cadence, to stop at the ones that could see me. I didn't stop. I looked away from the windows and watched the road where it crossed under a long shadow. The canopy of a gas station came up in front of us with plastic still wrapped around one corner post. The engine coughed and died under it. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The only sound was cooling metal and the buzz from the canopy lights. The fog hung lower here, level with my door. I got out and rounded to his side. He didn't fight. He turned his head in small ticks, as if someone were repeating directions so slowly they barely moved air. I took him by the wrist and walked us toward the cashier's booth. It was unlocked. Inside, it was all old receipts, an empty register, and a horseshoe nailed above the door frame, for reasons that had more to do with the last owner's father than with our night. You noticed glass that night. The booth had a narrow window. The cooler doors inside the service area had wide ones. Every pane carried that slow multiplication of us, plus something else. The tall thing didn't cross the threshold. It gathered in the glass, patient as if waiting for me to do the next part for it. I put my son on a crate and took the object from his hand. It vibrated with a tiny, steady insistence. I thought about the neighbor telling me to run clean and not look in the windows. Running wasn't on offer. Choosing was. I held the object in my fist and squeezed until it cut. I didn't drop it. Blood slicked my palm and ran into the line between my fingers. I pulled my son into my chest and said his full name. I said mine. I named our street back home, the grocery where the baggers know him, the dog we buried last fall, the teacher who sent a card when we moved. I said our life out loud in a steady voice, like I was reading a list that mattered. The lights under the canopy ticked once, and held. The cooler doors fogged from the inside. I didn't know why. The tall outline in the window thinned. It didn't make a show of leaving. It was more like the air let go. The booth door pushed inward against no wind and stopped. That last push felt like something leaning right over us. Fear spiked all the usual places, then flattened into something I could use. I said, clear and plain, that it couldn't have what I loved. I said it again, with my hands on the kid who slept in a Spider-Man shirt so much the print went dull. I felt the pressure tip the other way. The glass steadied. The outline peeled away and left only the two of us, and our breathing, and the sound of the fluorescent tubes. We sat there a long minute. Then I stood up and walked back to the car. The engine turned over. The road out remembered itself. The dead storefronts became empty but normal. The fog thinned until it was only mist and low yards. I drove back to the house at dawn because we had to get our things. The neighbor's porch light was on. He stood in his doorway, raised a hand with his palm out, and didn't call out. I didn't stop. We loaded the car while my son ate a granola bar, and then we left town in the daylight like any family with a moving truck that wasn't big enough the first time. We didn't keep the small object. I rolled down my window at the edge of town and dropped it into a ditch, where the weeds hummed with insects. It didn't feel like a ceremony. It felt like refusing to carry something I didn't need to carry. We live somewhere else now. It's quieter in the way I wanted, which is to say normal. My son hums sometimes in the late part of the night, a thin electrical sound that matches the buzz under a gas station canopy. I get up and make him laugh, or hand him a snack and break the hum and put a hand on his forehead. I don't say what I think it was. I don't assign a name. I remember the house, the windows, the booth, and the way a person can stand behind a wall they built out of something simple that doesn't bend. When he wakes to drink water, he uses his regular voice and says thanks, and the hall is a hall, and the corner is a corner, and the only thing pressing at the glass is the night itself.